Welcome to the Irish NFL Show's Wildcard Weekend recap in association with QuinnBet. Now, only one place remaining up for grabs in the divisional round at the time that we're going live here, as the Vikings and Rams are due to play in Glendale, Arizona in the early hours of tomorrow morning. The Philadelphia Eagles, not the Packers, sorry Kieran, awaiting the winner there. Good evening to all of you watching our live stream on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch and X, and indeed on our website, www.irishnflshow.com. Welcome also to all of those of you who are listening back to us on Tuesday or Wednesday to the podcast. Do remember, please, to like and subscribe wherever you're picking us up. Well, across the 5 games played between Saturday and Sunday, we saw the Eagles, alongside the Bills and the Ravens, record double-digit wins over the Packers, Broncos and Steelers, respectively. No problems covering the spread there. The Texans ran away from the Chargers as CJ Stroud delivered the magic and Justin Herbert delivered the tragic with 4 picks for him in Houston. Thankfully, though, the Commanders and the Bucs did save the best for last. So if you stayed up until the early hours of this morning, you were in for a treat, as a walk-off field goal decided a thrilling back-and-forth contest there and sealed the playoff win in his rookie season, no less, for Jayden Daniels with the doink over the crossbar. Doinks in the playoffs, of course, triggering for myself and Noel, having suffered the double doink exit a few years ago. But nobody cares about the Bears, and nor should they. We're here to focus on the teams that are still in the playoffs, with Kieran O'Donovan, Brian O'Leary, Noel Dowling and myself, Conor Brophy, with you this evening. Noel, before we get into the playoff action, a little bit of news, of course, with Mike McCarthy kind of being fired from the Cowboys, but looks like he might be in the frame for either the Saints or the Bears job, or at least we'll pick interviews up for either of those two as yet vacant positions as he exits the hot seat in Dallas.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. Obviously, the Bears had requested to talk to him last week, and the Cowboys had rejected that approach. So, look, the Bears have been looking to talk to a lot of coaches at the moment. I know there's a discussion in terms of, are they bringing in too many people and dividing their time too much or not? But I think McCarthy is a very interesting potential head coach that could come in. Obviously, he's an experienced head coach. He's won a lot of games in the NFL.
If I was any other team in the league, Noel, I just wait and see who doesn't get the Bears job, because they're obviously the gold. Like, the Bears' great record here. Remember when they botched the Bruce Arians hire? He goes on and wins a Super Bowl with Tampa Bay after turning around the Cardinals. Cliff Kingsbury didn't think he was good enough for the OC job last year. He goes and lights it up with Washington, still alive in the playoffs, of course, after last night's famous victory, and we could go on and on and on.
Yeah, no, that Bruce Arians one was terrible. I mean, I believe he was the reigning head coach of the year at that point, and he didn't take the job because they wanted him to do a mock press conference. I mean, you know what I mean? He's the reigning head coach of the year, and they want him to do a mock press conference, and he ended up with Mark Trestman, and that's what worries me about this Bears front office. But look, we'll see what happens here. I think McCarthy is an excellent head coach. He's somebody who you have to talk to. He's somebody who has shown he can work with quarterbacks. He's experienced. He's won a lot of games. He's 174 to 112 in the NFL, which is something the Bears desperately need. I don't want them to go and get an over-the-hill 73-year-old Pete Carroll. For me, that's not the right way going forward. Someone like a Mike McCarthy, I'm not against. At 61, he still has plenty of years left. If you can bring him in and he can continue to do what he's done.
No, we'll have Age Action Ireland onto you. You're writing off the septuagenarians there. Look at Pete Carroll is fit as a butcher's dog. Not a bother on him. I'd take him any day.
No. There's too much work to be done in Chicago. You want someone who's going to be there for a few years to maybe see it through. But look, this is the Bears, Conor. No matter who they pick, we'll be back here in 2 years.
We'll be looking for Pete Carroll on RIP.ie the way you're talking. Poor man.
No, he's all right. Pete will be fine if he gets the job. As I say, he's the best head coach out there, and he'll be amazing.
Kieran, your thoughts on Mike McCarthy, incidentally. You've obviously lived through the Mike McCarthy era, which delivered a Lombardi for Green Bay. In fairness to him, the last one that resides in the trophy cabinet there in Titletown. It wasn't all bad.
No, I mean he had a lot of consistency over the years, plenty of NFC Championship appearances. Obviously, of course, he got to the summit in 2010, and had a hell of a lot of good years in Green Bay. Now, I suppose a few things came into question as the years went on. A little bit of clock management, a little bit of the play calling was questioned at times, and I suppose he was a victim of his situation, in that a lot of people were very quick to give Favre and Rodgers the credit in Green Bay, and maybe dismiss the fact that he had any input in the longevity and the success that they enjoyed. Yeah, I mean, there was mixed reactions when he left. Obviously, he left in a situation where, again, the spotlight was shone on Aaron Rodgers. But look, the thing is, he got a lot of years of consistency out of Favre and Rodgers, 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks, and if he was in Chicago, I mean, you'd be going in there with a generational talent as well in Caleb Williams, and who's to say he couldn't find a period of success with the Bears as well, Jury's out for me. I'd say there's a few Packers fans might take him back after last night. I don't
know. Brian, in terms of the exit from Dallas, it's interesting the way it was handled, as pretty much everything involving Jerry Jones and his front office moves is.
Well, it's rare to see an NFL coach essentially let his contract wind down. We're kind of used to that with players and free agency, but never really we see this too often with coaches. And last week, as Noel's alluded to, they declined an opportunity to give him a fair crack at the whip in terms of interviewing for the Bears. And yeah, here we are today. The contract essentially is coming to an end tomorrow, and they're moving off him. It strikes me as Jerry Jones is getting very, and we spoke about it, owners at that age group who maybe not necessarily have the hunger and desire to go and win a Super Bowl anymore. More actually concerned about what the perception is of them in the public domain in the NFL circles. And I wonder, is he relieved that his contract is up because he essentially doesn't have to fire him? He doesn't have to be speaking to the next head coach coming in or interviewing people saying there was a reason and there was a rationale why we had to fire someone. Probably a little bit concerning for whoever goes into Dallas is on the hot seat immediately because the pressure that comes with being the Cowboys head coach. And for McCarthy, he probably doesn't have to have that firing on his CV. It probably works for everybody.
At the same time, it's kind of a strange one, though, isn't it? As I say, because he could have just let him interview for the Bears job last week. I mean, he might have actually disadvantaged McCarthy as far as that hiring process is concerned. Now, I suppose you don't know what the back and forth was over the contract negotiation. Maybe to give him the benefit of that they were hopeful that they might actually iron something out. But it is weird that he's going to go and interview for that job now a week later.
Yeah, I genuinely do think they tried to come to, I suppose, an agreement because they've missed the trick now in terms of the timings. The timings are off for interviewing. Obviously, we've seen an abundance of coaches within the playoffs interview over the course of last week, albeit most are doing it remotely at the moment. They can't interview Ben Johnson, and I'm calling out the Lions because they're the attractive proposition right now, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. Neither of them now can interview until the season is over because they've missed that cutoff. So that's interesting. If Ben Johnson is the one who everybody seems to think is now the likely candidate, he won't get his hands on him until the end of the season, which is, it feels like it's not far away, but it is quite we're talking 4 weeks, and then you've got to, if the Lions were to go all the way and win the Super Bowl, realistically, how quickly are they going to get an opportunity to interview him, give him the coaching job? There's a lot to be done in Dallas over the few weeks. It's going to be an interesting storyline to keep an eye on outside of the playoff games.
No, the Patriots moved quickly. They exited Jared Mayo, as we were talking about this time last week, and over the weekend, while everyone was watching actual football, the Patriots went and hired Mike Vrabel, which seems in some ways, according to a lot of Patriots fans, something that they could have done 12 months ago had they been minded to do so, and yet they didn't move that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the right move. Just done a little bit later than it should have been done. This should have been the move. Obviously, last year, they had Jared Mayo there, who was kind of promised that job and kind of passed on to him. But I think Mike Vrabel really would have been an excellent head coach option for the Patriots to go in. Now, there still would have been a lot of work to do. That doesn't mean that the record would have been much better this year than it was for Jared Mayo, but you just still feel that Mike Vrabel is a head coach that went out there in Tennessee, proved himself. He won a lot of games there. He had a record of 54 to 45. So he is a good head coach, and with those New England connections, I don't know. It just is surprising the way it transpired last year, and clearly they recognized what they felt was a mistake last year, and they've quickly gone to correct it and made that change now. So look, I don't think anybody's surprised this move got done, just when it got done, to be honest.
All right, let's talk some actual football now, Kieran. We had, as I said at the top, an instant classic, really, in Tampa, where the Commanders emerged with the walk-off field goal doinked in at the death by Gonzalez there for them. It's an unbelievable story, really, in Washington, based on where they've been. And I suppose gives hope to all of those of us who follow hapless and hopeless franchises that seem to be poorly run. You've changed owner, you've changed GM, you've changed coach. You take a swing on a rookie quarterback, and suddenly it's all on the up and up. The Commanders can literally do no wrong right now.
Yeah, and I saw a meme, or I saw an interesting take there this morning that that final kick, it sails wide right. If Dan Schneider still owns the team, that's the contrast in fortune in a very quick turnaround. But for me, look, this story is all about it's all about Jayden Daniels, the rookie sensation, and we talk about quarterbacks and what a good rookie class there's been, but he's been absolute top of the class by a mile in my opinion. He's been fantastic. Like the Commanders didn't punt. They didn't punt at all throughout this game. And this game was the 6th game-winning score this season in the final 10 seconds or in overtime. And that just, to me, like when you hear a statistic like that, there was 3 names came to mind. It was Joe Montana, Tom Brady, and Patrick Mahomes in the modern era. These guys built their reputations on the ability to scare the living daylights out of the opposition and say, we cannot give this team the ball last. And that kind of changes the narrative. That changes the mentality of head coaches. It changes it tightens defenses up, at the very end of a game. If you're saying to yourself, look, we have to be so careful. We can't give these guys time on the clock. We can't give them another possession. It affects coaching in opposition. It's absolutely, like, he's been lights out to watch. He's been their leading rusher. He's been, he's done everything for them. He's put them on their back all season.
And look, as you were saying there, as you were talking, I was thinking about, there was an article I read on ESPN last year, and they were talking about at that time whether Justin Fields was the guy that Chicago should hang on to or whether they should draft Caleb Williams. And one GM was really interested on the subject, and he said, look, what I'm looking for in a quarterback is one thing. Is this a guy that I can trust to come from behind on the road in a playoff game and lead a game-winning drive? Because if you're going to win a Super Bowl, sooner or later, you're going to have to do that. That's what all the greats are measured by, as you say, Montana's, the Brady's, the Pat Mahomes. Can you, when the game is on the line and everybody knows what you're going to do what needs to be done? Because you're in those obvious passing situations, and it's not all about what he was doing with his legs, which was kind of the early hype about Jayden Daniels. He's finding Scary Terry, who's never been fed like this in his life. Looks like a man reborn. It's kind of wound 10 years off the clock for him. And you had Diami there, who had a great game as well. This was pretty complete performance from a rookie quarterback. I picked the Bucs in this one purely on the basis that I thought it would be a bit of a reach for a rookie QB to go in there into a hostile place, where the Bucs are streetwise. They've the Lombardi glittering in the trophy cabinet from not too long past it. There's guys there, the Vita Veas and other parts of that team who know how these things are done. And he was ice. He was nails when he needed to be. Absolutely.
And like another stat that stands out is the Commanders only accounted for 46 yards without him. They had 46 yards on the ground if you take away Jayden Daniels' rushing yards. And so everything else he had an input in. And you mentioned McLaurin, you mentioned Diaby. They all came into it. Zach Ertz when he was needed as well. And again, you give credit to the front office in Washington. And I think, was it your interview, Noel, during the week where you talked about the structure and the leadership that they put in place in that locker room as well. Big veteran leaders with Super Bowl pedigree like Zach Ertz and like Bobby Wagner on the defensive side of the ball. Like the Commanders have, behind the scenes done an awful lot of things right and caught an awful lot of people on the hop this year as well. And fair play, it's a credit to them. And it's not as if the Bucs didn't show up last night. Baker, aside from his unfortunate, really costly fumble, he showed up. Mike Evans showed up. I mean, it was the game that we wanted to see all weekend and we hadn't seen up to then. So you give the Bucs credit. It was just two teams going at it, and it was the Commanders came out the right end of it.
No, it is rough on Baker, as Kieran calls it out there, that in a sense he's probably going to be remembered for the disastrous fumble. They get a red zone stop against the Commanders in a crucial spot. And they get the ball back, and the unfortunate, handoff ball falls to the ground. Baker was talking about after the game, he's going to wear that one for a while, I think was the phrase he used. But they're not even in the game if he isn't making like a sensational touchdown throw, ball, thrown literally skimming the defender's helmet. Ultimate tight window throw. It's the kind of thing that Aaron Rodgers made his whole name on. The angry run to get them going on the drive in the first place, like. He put the team on his shoulders, and you saw the best of what he can do. Unfortunately, you also saw that the other side of playoffs is you need a bit of luck. You literally need the bounce of the ball, and they didn't get it there.
Absolutely. I mean, as you say, look, this is the playoffs, and this is when mistakes like that get capitalized on. And it's unfortunate for Baker, who's had a fantastic season, and he's led the Bucks to the division championship or to division win, and they get in here and they're at home against a team who, I think some people thought they probably could have beaten because the Commanders have that kind of, this their first year really building up. But look, these things happen and these mistakes happen. For me, just as big as that is the Buccaneers' final field goal. I mean, they're 3rd and inches from the Commanders' 10 or 11-yard line. I mean, if they can't get a couple of inches to go on and maybe get more than a field goal with a touchdown, that again changes the game. But this is the way playoff football is. Kieran said it. I mean, the Commanders are a team this season who you just cannot let hang around. If you're going to make mistakes like that, unfortunately, it's gonna happen. And Jayden Daniels has shown he can capitalize on it. But the Bucs still have good players. Bucky Irvine's had a great season. He got 77 yards last night, looked a really good player. Mike Evans, as Kieran mentioned, had a really good game. And Marshawn Lattimore had a very tough night against Evans yesterday. When people were looking out for that kind of duel, it went Evans' way. But unfortunately for the Bucs, as I say, they don't get that first down. They end up taking 3 points. And we talk about the costly fumble. And you can't do that against the Commanders team that have a quarterback that's this special, who can really put you under pressure and make things happen, especially in the last 1-2 minutes of a game.
I'm sure that Bucs defense is going nuts as well, because like they came up big in the red zone, and to be fair, even on that after the turnover by Baker, like they get them to 4th down the second time around, and the Commanders go for it yet again, and they come up trumps. I mean, there's a lot of standouts. I mean, McCollum, he had a DPI later on in the game, which wasn't great, but he also he saved an absolute touchdown with an unbelievable job he did on Terry McLaurin when McLaurin had the ball in the end zone, just knocks the ball out of his hands. It was unbelievable defensive play. Brian, you had picked the Commanders. You had faith in Jayden Daniels, and it was rewarded.
Yeah, there's some things that I found a little bit alarming, maybe gone slightly under the radar today, Connor. This is the first time in NFL history that a team has come out the right side in terms of when they have the same kind of numbers. 3 and 5 on 4th down, the Commanders, where they don't tend to win when you have those type of numbers. And they're the first time, I think it's happened 8 times in NFL history in the playoffs, and they're the first team to come out the right side. If you touched on there, two red zone stops by the Buccaneers, and I just wonder. I know talks about that 3rd and inches. There was a procedure flag on Bucky Irvin, having had a great season. That doesn't happen. They probably do get the first down, and they probably score a touchdown. And it's a very different remit on the table then for this Commanders team to happen to go down the field and score a touchdown, but. Those, if they hadn't got over the line, I wonder what Dan Quinn would have got today. I wonder would he been getting a lot of stick for not taking those field goals, because it was such a tight game and those 3 points could have been crucial. And they didn't get it twice. At the time watching it, I was thinking this is going to come back to bite them. But I did pick them. I felt Noel called it out as well. Over the course of the last 4 to 5 weeks, we've seen them kind of come back from that middle of the season lull, and they've been winning these close games on the road. They've been winning with late field goals, late touchdowns, and it kind of, when you get to that stage of the season where you're kind of learning how to win these games, these tight window type situations. And they had it 2 weeks ago against the Falcons, which was a make or break game. They did it then. They did it last week to put themselves in a position to be the team going into Tampa. And I always felt going into Tampa was probably a better fit for them as opposed to going into the Rams. They played Tampa week 1, and once they lost, they put up a good account themselves. So I felt it was one of those games. We see it during the season, and then when they hit the playoffs, they play each other tight in the season. It comes around again, and 9 times out of 10, the other team tends to come out the right side of it. So yeah, it was a big win for them, and they've still got a huge challenge ahead this Saturday night. It's going to be a great game, though. Commanders and the Lions.
I know we'll talk about that a little bit later, and we'll have plenty of time to discuss it when we do our preview show on Thursday. But that's an interesting matchup from a Lions perspective. I was on to your friend and mine, Aaron Mullally, our resident Detroit Lions friend and listener to the show, and Aaron was saying, like, it's not necessarily the one he would have expected, but a little bit uneasy because Detroit does tend to struggle, or has over recent vintage, with mobile quarterbacks. It's not necessarily nailed on that Detroit defense will have the key to solve Jayden Daniels.
No, but I think this ultimately will come down to more so how this Commanders defense can play against this Lions offense, because this Lions offense, even in the games in which they lost recently against the Bills, they still put up over 40 points. Like, it's a very difficult task ahead of them. They've got some really good experienced players that came up big last night defensively as well. But Wagner in particular, he's a fantastic player. That was a great signing. We spoke in the offseason about bringing these experienced players in. Ultimately, for me, this is going to come down to. I think the Commanders' offense can put up points, but ultimately, I don't know whether the defense is going to be. Is it sustainable to stop this Goff engine for 4 quarters? And we saw what Gibbs did last week with the 4 touchdowns, 2 weeks off to prepare for this one. And as big of a win it's been, it's going to be a leggy type of game. The tiredness will need to, I wonder how much preparation in terms of going on the field and all the various different things they're going to have to do this week. This Lions team are going to be very fresh on Saturday night.
Well, let's go to Lincoln Financial Field. Kieran, you were saying when we were recording this time last week, you were thinking of wearing the Packers jersey because you had a funny feeling it might be the last time you'd get to wear it in anger this season. Unfortunately, from your perspective, you were right. It was a game where the Packers hung around, and it's an interesting exit for them in that previous seasons you've looked at playoff woes and gone, if only they had a defense good enough to match the offense. This year, Jeff Hafley comes in, transforms that unit. Defense was the strength of the team last night at Lincoln Financial Field. They held the Packers in there, kept them in the clinches, and it was offensively where they had all the troubles, offense and special teams.
Yeah, and it was an ominous start, wasn't it? I mean, the first play of the game, the ball, ball gets punched out and Keyshawn Nixon goes down, and you're thinking, my God, it's going to be a very long night. And they, when the Eagles cashed it in early on, it was, I was watching through gritted teeth, and look, you can talk about the referees and the call and the fact that, Nixon seemed to recover it, but it was old habits rearing their head. Whether it was great play by the Eagles or poor protection by Nixon, special teams, like throughout the game last night, it was old problems rearing their heads again. It was special teams woes. It was missed kicks, like McManus, who's come in and has been very reliable, misses an easy kick, and that just takes the wind out of your sails when you're looking for anything, a little spark. It was a really frustrating.
We saw effectively a dress rehearsal of this in week 18 against the Bears, where the Packers, to be fair, just handed that game away. Like, they just put themselves in a massive hole, did their best to dig their way out of it, but it was a problem of their own creation. It was just, to a certain extent, I mean, the Eagles are a very different proposition from the Bears. Obviously, you don't want to give a team like that a head start. And in fairness to the Packers, they did manage to hang around there, and they got their way back into it. But you just can't play like that in a playoff game against a team this good and hope to win.
No, and I was coming in and looking for ways that the Packers might steal a win this weekend, and I said, look, you can't. You look at a team's biggest weapon, and if you can take that away, you say, okay, beat us with something else. And I was hoping the Packers would go in and try and stymie Saquon Barkley, and then dare Jalen Hurts, a rusty Jalen Hurts, to throw the ball and see if they could get turnovers. It was exactly the opposite. That's exactly what the Eagles did. They sold out to stop the run, and they put a limit on Josh Jacobs and what he could do. They stuffed the box nearly every time, and fair enough, you can't keep a good man down for the whole game. Josh Jacobs, he carried the fight right to the end, and he got that big run to get them back in the game. However, that's what they did. They dared. They put the ball in Jordan Love's hands, and they said, "Come on, throw it to us." And he threw the ball to the Eagles 3 times, and that was essentially the difference throughout. And that and the fumble. The Packers had a great turnover differential all year, and it was 4-0 last night. And I mean, that's kind of game over. You can't expect to win a game when it's 4-0 on turnovers, and you can't. Again, all of Love's statistics throughout the year, multiple touchdowns in so many games. No passing touchdown last night. Granted, he's lost Christian Watson, he lost Dobbs last night, he lost Jayden Reed. However, we were talking about the depth of these receivers, but when you see Malik Heath going up for a relatively catchable ball and not being able to get his 2 toes down, you were just thinking, okay, fair enough, we have the depth, but we don't have the experience now. And I think looking at threads and fan zones and different pages today, I think there's a real cry now to go to the offseason and bring in a veteran offensive weapon and possibly a pass rush as well, because as good as the defense was, I have to say, look, and I give credit to Jeff Hafley, I think he's made huge improvements, as you said. There have been a few games though where the defense softened as the game went on, and when they absolutely had to have a stop, they couldn't. They couldn't get the turnover. Like when
speaking of soft as well, I was interested in that exchange between McKinney and was Valentine, wasn't it? Who was the defender? It was just manhandled by Dallas Goedert. Got the big stiff arm. Like, McKinney did not look happy at the efforts on that play. Like that he was posterized, as they say in NBA terms. Like, it's terrible look to be just manhandled like that.
He didn't have his feet set. He was off balance, and his feet, like, you know, you have to have a wide stance if you're going to go up against the likes of a Dallas Goedert. Look, I played a little bit of rugby at a low level, and I can tell you, if I lined up against a guy who was, you know, that much bigger than me, my legs facing the wrong way, you know, he's going to tip you over. And he didn't give him one or two, he gave him 3 belts in the side of the head on the way down to the end zone. It was embarrassing to watch, and I feel for Valentine. Look, 1-on-1, his odds against Dallas Goedert that close to goal weren't great, but he did himself absolutely no favors. He just wasn't set to make the tackle, and rightly so. McKinney, you know, let him have it on the sideline, and that's the kind of leadership that McKinney has actually brought to the defensive side of the ball. But you could do it a little bit more of it maybe on offense, and maybe, you know, I'm hearing a lot of people say go out and get the likes of a Max Crosby and Myles Garrett in the offseason, and then you're set up to go again. But no, it's going to be a long offseason, and you know, look, I do think they've got the foundation, they've got the basis of a good team there, but there's a lot of questions going into the offseason. And Lafleur has a few to answer as well, in my opinion. I still have faith in him. I still think he's a good coach, but you know, game management and just that kind of hard-nosed mentality when you have to have it. He still hasn't got that signature win, and you know, he needs to get over that hump.
Noel, from an Eagles perspective, they await the winner of the Vikings and Rams, the Monday night game tonight, of course. They still have a lot to work on, though, based on last night. And, you know, Kieran called it out earlier on, and I think it does bear revisiting. The Packers' game plan should have been stop the run and make Jalen Hurts beat you with his arm. He's coming back off, you know, 3-game absence due to recovering and being in the concussion protocol. And he did not look good last night. You give him, again, the benefit of the doubt because he hasn't played in a while and he's rusty, but he did not look playoff caliber. And if you're the Vikings or the Rams, you probably were intimidated by what you saw defensively from the Eagles. Nothing that you saw on the other side of the ball necessarily would have put any fear into you.
Yeah, well, that's a good point about Jalen Hurts, because obviously, look, he is coming back from an injury, and we do have to see, you know, was it kind of a mixed performance last night something to do with that, or is this something that teams can exploit going forward? But I mean, look, you do mention the run and Saquon Barkley. I mean, again, 119 yards last night, you know, 2,000 yard season. I mean, he is the guy you need to stop anyway. I mean, he's such a phenomenal running back. What a year he's having there. I know we talked off air just before we came on, and you were mentioning like how good this offensive line is, but they know the tricks of the trade as well, and they have the dark arts in that line as well. So, you know, that running game is tough to stop. And I think Hurts is he is a very good quarterback. He's double, or he has a ground game himself, and he can hurt you on the ground. But I've never been fully sold with him in terms of passing. And I do think now, when you look at the ground game that they have there, I think putting him under pressure and trying to make him win the game is kind of a better option for opposition teams. But again, it's still very hard. I still think this Eagles team is a top NFC team. I think they're probably the second best team behind the Lions for me. And still, they do have some really good players there. So it is going to be tough to stop. But if you are going to zero in on something that you really need to kind of focus on, I think trying to put pressure on Hurts and seeing if you can kind of make him win the game, and as you say, take out that running game as much as you can, is probably a kind of a better game plan to try and execute.
To Noel's point, Brian, you look at that Eagles roster and it's just stacked from top to bottom with talent. Even the guys they brought in, like the Cooper DeJean, Quinion Mitchell this year, they hit on another couple of draft picks, and you know they've hit on every draft class really in the last couple of years. You look at Jalen Carter in year 2 is having another great year. They built from the inside out. A lot has been said about that. They're so stout across both lines. They have such strong fundamentals, and they've got guys in every single position that they are a very, very tough out for wherever they end up in the NFC, and a likely collision course with the Lions, depending on how things work out next weekend. Not to be too presumptuous, but that'd be a mouth-watering clash, because they really are two heavyweights.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how they manage that occasion and atmosphere, if it is to be the Lions and going on the road. Obviously, if Lions were to be knocked off this weekend, then the likelihood that the NFC Championship game would be in Philly. But Philly is a different beast in terms of playing the game in Philadelphia. The crowd are very much on top of the players. They're on top of the referee. Obviously, you've seen some footage today, which is probably very much uncalled for in terms of the level of abuse some of the Packers fans were were taking in the crowd, which doesn't come as a surprise because this is something, if you go to the link, this is the expectation. You're not going to have an easy afternoon watching your team on the road. But some of the pieces last night, what would concern me is that they were the severity of some of the injuries in which they got. It was a very injury-ravaged game last night for both sides. It was the Packers now will go back, but like as Kieran alluded to, players were dropping like flies last night for the Packers, and the similar situation for the Eagles to a certain extent in terms of the secondary. Obviously, Cooper DeJean looks like he's gone for the season. Slay was hobbling badly last night. They have some injury concerns for the weekend, and that'll be interesting to see how they manage that. But as you said, they have this knack of finding a way. I'm not necessarily saying they lean on the referees for decision making, because we have these conversations, in particular the Chiefs fans will get very disgruntled when people allude to the fact that the Chiefs have the ear of the referees. But it felt a little bit like that last night. I thought a lot of decisions that could go their way went their way, but overall I thought it wasn't a great polished performance. It was good that Hurts came back and started early, but AJ Brown had one catch last night. Like, there wasn't a lot of. You look at some of the numbers of the game, and the Packers, you'd look at it, if you didn't know the score, you'd say the Packers did a great job defensively, but the Packers kind of fell into the trap last night, and they spoke about it in the commentary. LaFleur said all week, don't get caught up in the hype, don't get caught up in the crowd, don't get caught up in situations where, between the plays, and that kind of, they captured the players last night. We saw later on defensive players getting very disgruntled, and then there was some dubious calls in terms of head-on collisions which weren't called. I'm not going to say would it dictate the result of the game, but I felt that certain things went their way last night. It'd be interesting to see if they go on the road, will it be as straightforward as that? It's probably not the case.
Brian, AJ Brown had one catch for 10 yards last night, but yet he won the social media game because
he's reading a book on the sideline.
Inner Excellence, Train Your Mind for Extraordinary Performance and the Best Possible Life by Jim Murphy, who is now on the bestseller list on Amazon, and could not be more thankful to AJ Brown for that particular distinction. Jim Murphy living his best life, having trained his mind for extraordinary performance, and now training the next generation to do so as well. So we'll see whether AJ Brown puts that into practice.
Conor, those things can come back to bite you. We saw a couple of years ago, I think Lamar was wearing sunglasses on the sideline, and he was bigging up about beating, I think it was the Bengals at the time, and then later on in the season he lost a game where people were kind of reflecting on certain things that players do on the sideline. I'm probably calling one experience, but these things have a way of coming back to bite you. And I wonder now if the Lions were to roll them in the championship game, would be players on the sideline reading particular books to kind of give it back to them. I didn't really like it, but again, I don't really like the Eagles, unfortunately. But like I just felt.
I thought you were going to say I didn't like it because I don't like reading, don't like books.
No, there's a way of behaving, I think, on the sideline. Okay, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek today. It's all funny, and the social medias are going off on it. But I just think, be respectful of the team which you're playing against. Like Saquon Barkley after the game. I don't know.
He says he reads it every game, in fairness. It's
I reckon,
okay,
I reckon Big Dom gave him a book to stop him jawing with the fans just to keep him distracted.
Yeah. And if anybody's seen Saquon Barkley's
colouring books, did he?
Saquon Barkley's interview after the game, they asked him why he didn't run the touchdown in. Because it was a touchdown. He could have ran it. He would have scored. And he said, no, situational football, I needed to go down and kill the game off. He goes, what happens if I run to the end zone and pull my hamstring? Sirianni and the Eagles fans are going to give me abuse for continuing with the play. He goes, there's Packers players chasing me whose season is over. One of them pulls a hamstring and he's sitting on the sideline for 3 months as opposed to getting his holiday. That's a different mindset with Saquon Barkley. We spoke about it last week in terms of during the season where he went around the rallying cry to certain players. He's the model professional and he plays the game in the right way. And that's where I thought AJ Brown should have done it on the sideline as opposed to reading books. But I'm very old school, as you know, Conor. I don't like those type of things.
Consider yourself warned, AJ. And Saquon goes on. Well, let's look at happenings in Highmark Stadium, Orchard Park, where the Bills took care of business against the Broncos team, Noel, that looked really overmatched. Had a great start to the game. And, let's give credit where credit's due. And Brian was talking to Colin Cronin overnight about the Broncos' performance in the season that they've had. They did everything they could. They did everything that an underdog team is supposed to do. They were super aggressive. They come out slinging. Touchdown pass from Bo Nix to Troy Franklin was just a great play, a great throw, puts them up. Fake punt on the next drive. They're trying to maximize opportunities, steal possessions, because you just need everything to go your way if you're going to, overturn the odds in a game like that. Unfortunately for them, though, it wasn't to be, but they put up a great fight along the way.
They did, and as you say, they came out looking like they were really going to make a game of it. They had those trick plays, and Bo Nix made that big play, and it looked like they might be able to push the Bills a bit. But I think the way the game ended up going is pretty much how I thought it was. I love what the Broncos have done all season. I love watching Bo Nix playing now. I think he's a fantastic quarterback. I think he's going to get much better, and I think the Broncos have themselves a really good player there. But this Bills team is too strong. We've talked all year about Josh Allen. James Cook has obviously really stepped up and is a top player there as well. He's been massively productive this year. And then Allen has taken receivers like Shakir and Samuel and even Kincaid and kind of brought them up to a next level. And I think this Bills team is a team that has aspirations for a Super Bowl this year, and rightly is in that conversation to go on and win the whole thing. And I think this Broncos team just aren't there yet. They did feel to me like a kind of a one and done playoff team, which is how it's transpired. But that's not meant in a negative way at all. I mean, this is a team I didn't see getting anywhere near the playoffs, and what they've done this year has been amazing. And I think they're going to get stronger from here. But I look at this Bills team, and I look at this player, Josh Allen, who for me is the MVP. And I think he kind of started a little slow. I didn't think he looked quite Josh Allen at the very start of the game. But he got himself into it, and then when
funny, I have a slightly different take on that. Noel, it's interesting you say it, because I thought what I saw from Josh Allen last night was a maturity that I haven't seen in previous seasons. That, like, in previous years, they start like that. He sees Bo Nix coming out and slinging it, and he goes to do anything you can do, I can do better. And he goes out to play hero ball, and he didn't do that last night. I saw him like taking checkdowns. I saw him throwing balls in the grass if he thought he was going to be sacked. He was really mature about how he approached the game, and he played a 4-quarter game, and they were ruthlessly efficient. I mean, you look at it, did you see the clock management or the time of possession stats? The Bills had the ball for 41 minutes. Like, that's ridiculous. Even when the Broncos were in the game, they weren't actually in the game. They were being slowly bled the whole way. And Allen didn't do anything stupid. And the one time he did strap on the hero cape when he hit Ty Johnson in the back of the end zone on 4th and 1, when he could have scrambled for it, he could have done something different. It was the right thing to do, and it was exactly the right throw when he needed it. I looked at that and I thought, wow, that's a different Josh Allen. That's the extra little gear that he not that he particularly needed it, but that makes them even more dangerous to me.
Yeah, no, maybe that's the case, as you say. Maybe he's a little more not reserved, but a little more controlled in what he's doing. I mean, I just have to talk about that play you mentioned, that throw, and then that catch was amazing. I know we were having our back and forth. Was he in? Was he out? I thought maybe his foot had a kind of touch just beforehand, but watching it again, I think they were right. What a catch! But yeah, I mean, look, I think Josh Allen is just been amazing. I absolutely love watching him playing. I think this year he's just been the most valuable player to his team, and that's why I think he'll get that award. And I think last night, again, as I say, I think the Broncos are a really good team. They can go. They have a defense that's really strong, and they can build that offense up now that it looks like they have their quarterback in situ. But yeah, this Bills team are a different beast. And watching this offense last night, I mean, as I say, he wasn't Josh Allen-ish for me at the start, but that didn't mean he was bad. As you say, maybe I was just expecting crazy hero ball. That's what I've come accustomed to. But when the game's on the line, you trust that Josh Allen will be able to win it for this team. And
Brian, we talked a little bit about in the run up to this game about how. Sorry, Noel, you were in and out there. I'd moved on to Brian. Yeah. I called an audible there. We talked a little bit in the run up to the game, Brian, about how the Bills' offense is Josh Allen apart. Maybe the team without superstars, but that's probably doing a serious disservice to James Cook, who actually has probably joined the superstar club this year. He's been sensational all the way through the season. Scored again at the weekend.
Yeah, 121 yards last night, Connor, and you wouldn't have really thought that was the amount of yards he picked up, because he methodically did it over the course of the game. But some really key third down plays early on in the game in particular, where, as you said, they're down 7-0. I think what you also recognize now, excuse me, Sean McDermott's I think he's starting to kind of get his head around these playoff games. You're talking about Moneyball situation. I think in the past they kind of tend to hit the panic button very early on when they're down. We saw that against the Bengals a couple of years ago, albeit it was in the snow. But as you said, there's a maturity about the team. There's probably a little bit more maturity about the coaching. They're well used to being in the playoffs. These type of games where they go down early, it doesn't necessarily mean it's over. They'll come back and win. But Cook was lights out for the first half in particular. He got huge numbers in the first half, which kind of is reflective of Josh Allen's rushing numbers. But we're so used to him rushing for first down. He only had 43 yards last night. He had 38 of those in the first half. He didn't need to do anything in the second half. As I said, they bled them dry. They bled them dry with a combination of passing and rushing attack. Cook had a fabulous game. And this team, for years, we spoke about, they've never really had solidified themselves in the running game. Even when going back to when Brian Dable was there, it was a very pass-orientated offense. And it kind of still is to a certain extent. But now they've got a leading running back in the league who's probably slightly under the radar in terms of how good he is. But he's a huge key for them. It'll be a huge key for them going into this game next weekend, because ultimately it's going to come down to who can, the time of possession, you touched on there, that's going to be key next weekend. Like we saw on Saturday night, how essentially it's a bit of I wouldn't say it was a copycat, but the Ravens bled the Steelers dry on Saturday night. It was Lamar rushing continuously. Stop it when you can, and if you can, we'll continue to do it. And that's the type of thing I can see this weekend in terms of teams trying to have these methodical drives, keep the other quarterback off the field as much as possible. But they never really looked in any danger. I was quite surprised by the Broncos play calling. I think Bo Nix is the nearest thing we've seen to Josh Allen. I'm not necessarily saying he's at the same level. Obviously, it's his first year, but he has the same attributes. You watch him play the game.
Well, Josh Allen wasn't Josh Allen in year one either. Like this guy has huge ceiling, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I felt the run pass option was a huge part of the Broncos offense throughout the course of the season. We look at the numbers in which Bo Nix had 131 yards in a rushing game on a Thursday night in New Orleans, albeit the Saints were struggling at that stage. And then he could have had a lull, and he came again towards the back end of the season in terms of his. And they never really got him going. He had 40, I think he had 39 yards over the course of the game. They never really utilised him. I thought the Broncos could have done a better job offensively. I know Colin called it out on the Reaction podcast last night. He felt Sean Payton got away from what was working over the last few weeks, and that's going to play into the hands of the Bills. And then there was some quirky play calling where he does the fake punt. He's on the right side of it, and then three plays later he's on a fourth down again, and he decides to punt for real. It didn't really make any sense. If you're going to go toe-to-toe with this Bills offense, you're going to have to make big plays and make big decisions. And it seemed lacking last night. It just felt like they were out of depth.
The pass to Troy Franklin for the touchdown aside, Kieran, the Bills defense wasn't really tested in the way we have seen them tested in some weeks over the regular season. You know, they conceded a huge number of points, obviously, against the Rams in one particularly notable game. They had a ding-dong battle with the Lions, obviously, too. And if there is a question mark over that Bills team, as complete as they look for the most part, it is whether they will be able to hold as intimidating a unit as they have facing them now with the Ravens at the weekend, and then potentially the Chiefs beyond that. That is the one question that we need to see answered.
Absolutely, and it's we're going to have to just wait and see, and that's the game that everybody is going to be looking forward to next week. You took my big stat from me. I was going to mention the time of possession. 41-43 was the Bills' time of possession, and you're right. I mean, the Broncos didn't have enough time to test the Bills' defense, so we didn't get a whole pile of info or a whole pile of tape on the Bills' defense last night. But it's going to be absolutely mouthwatering. When you look at the matchup next week, you're talking about two quarterback running back combinations, and you're talking about a Ravens team that has really stepped up defensively in the last couple of weeks. And you've also seen the Bills defense it's not too far back where they lost an absolute shootout to the Rams as well. So I mean, some people would say that the Bills defense could be right for the picking if the conditions are right for Lamar, especially with the with the run game that they're going to have to key in on so much. So look, there's a whole host of matchups that are just absolutely mouthwatering to look forward to next week, and we look forward to even talking about it throughout the week and speculating as to who's going to come out the top, because I saw another great comment: just hold off on the MVP and give it to the winner next week. Because I think it is that tight. I think it is that close now. I think Lamar's done a hell of a lot to justify a case for a third one. If there is a bone of contention, if I was a Bills fan, I'm going to bring up something that might be an absolute moot point. I had a fierce issue with Mac Hollins last night and the step over. You talk about going into the playoffs and fine margins and things that can keep your team out of trouble. And if AJ Brown is annoying Brian on the sideline, Mac Hollins getting up after a super catch and gain for his team, getting up, and he must have known he was going to take cost his team 15 yards stepping over his opponent there. It's the same as Jalen McMillan making that gun symbol last week. Then when they clearly know that this is against the rules, they're going to cost the teams. And how coaches don't catch these guys and shake them in the locker room and say, listen, cut it out. Anything that you know for a fact that's not going to help our team, you just keep it out of the game. And you see Matt Collins walking in there dressed as Fred Flintstone.
I was just going to say that if you're going to show up like Fred Flintstone, you better not be giving away unsportsmanlike conduct penalties in the
yeah. So that was my gripe last night. But no. All in all, the Bills were super value for money. And again, like it's funny. We're saying that the Bills owned the Broncos from start to finish. The Broncos had a kick to level it going into halftime, but you knew, and I had the same word taken down as you, Brian. You said methodical there with a go, and that's what it was. It was methodical, and they owned time of possession in the first half, and you did feel like even though it was a close game on the scoreboard, it was absolutely a matter of time. I think it was inevitable, even if it was level at halftime, you would have said it's only a matter of time before the dam breaks.
No,
Connor,
sorry, Brian, go on.
Sorry, I just want to jump in there on that one. I just don't understand how coaches, as much as they're coaching the game, they've got to coach the player. And Kieran's right. How they're not saying before the game or any circumstance, I don't care how good of a play you make, just get up and get ready for the next play. Zay Flowers did the same thing in the championship game last year. The Ravens were out of that game, and he had a huge, I think he went off on a yards after catch. And at the very end of the play, he spun the ball in front of the Chiefs player, and he lost 15 of those yards and went straight back. And I think then on the resulting play, I think it went into the fourth quarter, and then he fumbled it on the goal line. It was a circumstance of 3 or 4 plays, which kind of reflected on the whole game itself. But you just don't understand why. I know they're hyped up. I get it to a certain extent. But it has to be common sense must prevail, because it's a huge opportunity to go and play in the Super Bowl. That's 15 yards last night wouldn't cost them next weekend in a huge game.
Well, we all remember the one in the Bengals Chiefs championship game. Patrick Mahomes gets hit going out of bounds, and it cost them a Super Bowl appearance.
Yeah.
But that was different. Sorry, that was different. That put them in the field goal range. That was late in overtime. Yeah, and Mahomes going down the side. Needless push, 15 yards, and Harrison Butker obviously took advantage. But yeah, it's as much about the mental capacity to get yourself over the line in these games, especially over the next 2 weeks when there's going to be so much hype around these games.
No, let's talk Ravens. For my money, and I'll hear arguments for the Lions, but depleted as they are, I think the Ravens shade it for me. I think they're the most complete team in football, and that I know it's only the Steelers that they handled over the weekend, but tell me where the chink in the armor is, because I'm not seeing it. No, you're on mute there. You're depriving us of pearls here. Sure, that was an absolute zinger. No, we'll come back to you in a moment, maybe, Noel. Kieran, what about that Ravens performance? I mean, you touched on Lamar, but geez, it's not just Lamar. I mean, in his own comments, he was singing the praises of Derrick Henry. What are he, 189, 199 yards? Ridiculous numbers. Like, the Ravens ran the ball further than the Steelers passed it.
Yeah, he carried the ball. It was 16 for 186 and 2 touchdowns the last day. We mentioned it yesterday morning. And like the first thing I wrote down in my notes was the Henry effect. And it's not just Derrick Henry being Derrick Henry. It's Derrick Henry giving Lamar opportunities. It's Derrick Henry opening up lanes for Rashad Bateman and the receivers downfield.
Derrick Henry taking TJ Watt out of the game. TJ Watt has to spy Derrick Henry the whole, just brilliant game plan, brilliant execution.
Absolutely. And I mentioned the 2 tight ends. I keep talking about the 2 tight ends here. I think they're key as well, because you can play that 12 personnel with the H-back formation, and you've got 2 tight ends who are dangerous receiving weapons as well. So again, it's just that element of surprise that they have. You mentioned complete. Now that the defense has caught up, I totally agree with you. I think they're the most complete team in football. You asked how, where do you see hope for the Bills? Or, not that the Bills aren't close to being on a par with them, but it is the fact that little narrative of the fact that Lamar has the capability to drop off in the playoffs, that's going to haunt him until it doesn't. It's going to haunt him until he gets over that hump. If he doesn't come out next week and play like he's played all season, that's going to be the knock on him again. And that's what the Bills will hope for. But I give him credit. He's been different this year, and he hasn't shied away from it. We talked about that yesterday morning. He's fully aware of the fact that his stats are completely different in the playoffs, but he's doing everything he can to right those wrongs. He's changed the narrative on he's beaten Mike Tomlin in the Steelers, beaten Mike Tomlin twice in a row now. He's kind of shaking narratives one at a time. So that's the next step for him now. Just go out and beat Josh Allen next week, and then go beat Patrick Mahomes the following week, and you're talking about a different story then.
Like Tom Brady in his prime, I'm going straight back to the guy that dropped the ball. You give him another chance. No, is your mic working now? Give me some pearls of wisdom.
Can you hear me there?
I can. Yeah.
Excellent.
Give
Sorry
us
about
your
that.
thoughts on
It's
that.
going to be funny tonight.
We were just talking about the Ravens' performance on offense, but they just shut the Steelers down as well.
They did, yeah. Look, and then the Ravens' defense, there was some question marks during the season, especially in the secondary. But I think as the season's gone,
Noel's having a mare there.
Ravens team, and
sorry, Noel, you're dropping like George Pickens there.
Yeah, sorry lads, the machine is acting funny tonight.
Brian,
can you hear me now?
We'll go back to you in a second there. No, sorry, Brian. The Steelers side of this equation is interesting now heading into the off season though, because you're getting to the dance every year, but you don't really have the moves when you get on the floor. It seems to be how it looks for them right now. Russell Wilson was an ingenious move in some ways, certainly from a salary cap perspective. Like they got a more than serviceable quarterback, but if you're in the AFC arms race, you're behind Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, maybe now CJ Stroud to throw into the mix, and Bo Nix coming fast on your heels. There's only so many spots in the playoffs, and you can lean on the league's most expensive defense, but that's only going to take you so far.
Yeah, and this was the disgruntlement of Steelers fans going into the season. When we were previewing the AFC North, we spoke about the fact that they brought 2 quarterbacks in, and some may thought this was a fantastic idea. We'll roll with one, and if it doesn't work, we'll move on to the next one. Hopefully he can bring us to the promised land. And for a certain, I suppose to a certain extent, you could say it's work, because Justin Fields got them off to that fast start. But obviously, there came a time when he felt Russell Wilson was probably the better fit for going, in terms of, transitioning into what they wanted to do offensively. But we did speak about where they're going to be in 12 months or even 8 months, because ultimately neither of us really felt that this would be sustainable in terms of bringing them to the playoffs. I spoke to a Steelers fan in Munich the evening of the Giants Panthers game. He said we're a real serious threat for the Super Bowl, and I genuinely could not see it. And I know they were playing well and they were winning games, and at that stage they were deemed to be the second seed. But I said there's a lot of football to be played, and come December you'll see the true teams and the true grit come true.
I looked at 2 teams down the stretch, as we all did. I looked at the Bengals and I looked at the Steelers, and you're looking at that Cincinnati team and saying, okay, they're the authors of their own misfortune because of the way they started the season and how slow they started the season and how long it took them to get it together. But really, the Steelers were only in the playoffs because the Bengals wet the bed. Yeah,
and we're not far removed from them putting 44 points up on this Bengals defense. They went into Cincinnati, put 44 up in a game that nobody genuinely thought they'd actually win, because no one felt they could live with that Bengals offense. They did that day, but that was probably the last. It was like as if that day everything came together for them, but nothing ever came together thereafter. And they're going to back in no man's land, because what are they going to do? Like, Russell Wilson's a free agent. Justin Fields is probably going to move on to another team and again be a reliable backup that you can bring in certain circumstances in the game, your run pass option type play calling. But neither for me are the long-term solution there. And I spoke to a couple of Steelers fans, and then Chris Adamski on the podcast last week said, if they lose this game and lose it convincingly, there's going to be a stench on this team for the off season. He spoke with George Pickens and where they are with that, because that is an underlying issue in that team. The way Mike Tomlin has to continue to control him, he's not at the level of your AJ Brown. I know AJ Brown he literally dropped the ball in terms of how he finished his career.
But George Pickens will say, and I'm sure he does, he's not shy of speaking his mind, as we saw at the podium when he was asked, was he optimistic for the Steelers offense next season? And he said no. But how could he be? Because he's looking around going, well, I don't have Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes or any of these other guys throwing me the ball. I've got, Russell Wilson, who is fine, but he's not the Russell Wilson that we need to get to where we need to be.
Yeah, that's why I think they're in such a quandary now, because they've done so well over the course of the season. They made the playoffs, and for some teams, we joked about it. Your Giants and your Braves, we'd probably bite your hand off to have an opportunity to play a playoff game, and even if you do come out the wrong side of it. Like, Colin has been a long-suffering Broncos fan. They finally came back to the playoffs and they're one and done, but it doesn't get away from a great season. But the problem is, what do they do now? Because they're selecting so late in the draft. There's not an abundance of quarterbacks coming out this year. They tried that at the 20th pick a couple of years ago when they took Kenny Pickett, and that was the only quarterback selected in that draft, and that was a reach. But I understood why they gave it a go. It hasn't, and they brought in Mitch Trubisky that offseason. It's like the same cycle. Bring in experienced quarterback. Hopefully that works. It doesn't work, they move on to the next one. They recycle through wide receivers. If you look at their wide receiver room over the last 6 years, they recycle through wide receivers continuously. There's no settled plan there. So I can understand why Steelers fans are frustrated. And it's terrible when you're going into a playoff game, as exciting as you can be, but having a winning season. Nobody genuinely gave them any chance to win that game on Saturday night, and that's how it transpired. And I remember a couple of years ago when they made the playoffs, I think they were the first year of the 7th seed, and they went into Kansas City on a Monday, and they got torched that night as well. It's no fun to a certain extent when you know it's not predictable. There's no unpredictability about it. You're going to go into the playoffs, you're going to get beaten comprehensively by your divisional rival. It's not a good way to end the season.
No, the Texans, despite being underdogs, beat the Chargers comprehensively in the end. Chargers looked like they had come with a game plan, but you can't get over 4 interceptions from your quarterback. Justin Herbert takes the L in a big way there, and it's an interesting one because it takes a little bit of the shine off the great Jim Harbaugh return to the NFL, turnaround in the culture. They're one and done after it all.
Yeah, it does. I mean, again, what a season Jim Harbaugh comes in and has. And I think there's a lot of high hopes then. They're kind of hoping for the Texans because it just feels like the Texans are having such a kind of they win the division, but it feels like they've eked along and they've kind of won a poor division. And then, the Chargers start well, but they don't finish with touchdowns. They finish with field goals. And I know we discussed, myself and Kieran and Shane had discussed how it can become disheartening when you play well on offense and you put some good, runs together, good drives together, and you only come away with 3. It can be a bit disheartening. And then both offenses then kind of after that was very, very patchy. This was a game where defenses were really smothering both offenses, and it was that kind of a game until a botched snap seemed to just suddenly wake the Texans offense up. CJ Stroud picks it back up. He gets out to the outside. He finds Hutchinson in the middle. And that just seemed to spark a Texans offense, which does have exciting players and does have players who on the day can hurt you, but haven't really strung it together this season. And from then on, look, for the Chargers, it was just it was a terrible game. You mentioned Justin Herbert and his 4 interceptions. I mean, that's just one of those days where you can't get over. And also, looking at the game, I found that the Chargers really got away from what they done well this year, and that was not put the pressure on Herbert. That was run the ball, get your yards on the ground, and let then this young, exciting quarterback come in and complement that and do what he needs to do to kind of put you over the top. And this weekend, they got away from that run. They put a lot of into Justin Herbert's hands, and unfortunately, they came up against the Texans defense that really was on form this week and really put it up to the Chargers and dominated them. And then once that Texans offense kind of got even semi-moving, it was just enough then to really take advantage of a Chargers team and wore down that defense. So, look, for the Chargers, great season. It does feel like it's ended on a really sour note, even though nobody would have had them here in the first place. And for the Texans, who knows? Maybe it's a bit of a boost going into the next round of the playoffs because they certainly needed it. Given the season they had, there was a lot of negativity about this team. Maybe this little boost this weekend can push them forward. But again, they have a lot of work to do on that team. But who knows? I mean, all they can do is win their first game. They've done that, so they'll take it on from there.
Kieran, as Noel mentioned it there, and if the Texans were to go on and win it all this year, there'll be oral histories written about that particular play that he referenced because it's a botched snap. It looks like it's a busted play, and it's going to bury the Texans deep in their own territory. Instead, CJ Stroud somehow manages to pull a rabbit out of the hat, extend the play, unbelievable completion over the middle, and it changes the whole trajectory of the game. And it's a reminder that, okay, you don't want to live like that. You don't want to be relying on that because you need much more consistent offensive play than perhaps the Texans have shown for a lot of this season. But when you have it, it makes all the difference in a tight spot if you have a guy that can produce that bit of magic.
Yeah, and confidence is the great equalizer, isn't it? All of a sudden, again, it was a spark. But you go back before that botched punt, the first was 5 drives for the Texans. It was fumble, punt, interception, punt. And you were saying, God, this is going absolutely horribly wrong. And I could actually see no recovery for the Texans. And I thought only for the fact that the Chargers, Noel mentioned, could not get the run game going. Dobbins and Edwards combined for 50 yards. I think 16 carries only throughout the game. Herbert just lost all trust in every receiver that wasn't called Ladd McConkey. Will Dissly had two bad drops. One was a touchdown, and the other one was caused an interception. And And so like things were falling apart for the Chargers, and all of a sudden Nico Collins became Nico Collins, and Joe Mixon became Joe Mixon, and CJ Stroud showed us the quarterback that he was last year. And look, maybe a moment can maybe they can carry that through to next week, and a rising tide lifts boats. I'm trying out all the cheesy metaphors now, but like they are going to be absolutely buzzing. I mean, we talk about house money all the time. They have nothing to lose now going into Arrowhead next week. And look, I know the Chiefs, the playoff Chiefs are absolutely different animal to the regular season Chiefs, but loads of teams have played them close, and if they can just get, if they can get their heads right, get any bit of a better start than they had last week, and keep the scoreboard down, just stay in it. They do have talent. I mean, they have talent on both sides of the ball, and excellent defense as well. Great pass rush. And I talked about body language and coaching body language. I thought DeMeco Ryans was fantastic. He was up and down the line. He was an absolute ball of energy. And if he can bring that as well, look, it's kind of similar to the Dan Campbell effect. It's infectious and it's contagious. And they've all of a sudden people are excited about the Texans, and we were out on them for weeks. So it's exciting for Houston next week.
Brian, and to be fair, the Texans have every reason to be excited going to Arrowhead. They're not lambs to the slaughter by any means. That defense is, as you mentioned, with you got those twin edge rushers in Hunter and Anderson who've been playing well all season. Stingley, all-pro defensive back again. Had that pick six, had a great game. The one thing that they will need to do, though, next weekend, and if they're going to go any further, is they've got to protect CJ Stroud. I mean, it's been their Achilles heel all season. He has literally been running for his life. There's guys coming from for all directions, and the one defensive coordinator you don't want to be facing with a porous offensive line is the one that's on the opposing sideline next week, in Steve Spagnuolo.
Who's had 25 days to prepare for this game. Obviously he would have been factoring in both sides of the ball over the course of the last few weeks. He would have known the Chargers very well anyway, but they're not. It's not. I think we're only 2 or 3 weeks removed from when they played each other on the Saturday night game, which unfortunately that's when we had the serious injury to Tank Dell, and they won that game by 8 points, and it wasn't as convincing as people might have thought going into that because the way in which the Texans were playing at the time. But you've touched on it there. This is the inability to keep him upright over the course of over the course of 4 quarters, and it's been telling over the last month, 5 weeks how bad it's been that they've been struggling to put away poor teams within the division. And last weekend, look, you touched on that. It came right for them early on. It came right for them at the right time. A lot of that for me still kind of reflects badly on the Chargers and how they mismanaged the game. Noel called it out earlier. I just want to jump back to something Noel said about putting in Herbert's hands to a certain extent. Like they intercepted Stroud and they're on the right side of the halfway line. And it's 6-0 at that stage. Even a field goal at that stage is another dampener for the Texans team. Then they're down by double digits essentially, and he goes immediately with the money ball trying to get the touchdown. For me, that was a strange move because Harper doesn't do those type of plays. They got away from what's worked for them. I thought the offensive line probably served better this weekend over the course of the 4 quarters for Stroud to do his magic, but it took a long time to get there. And if they don't get there early on Saturday, you know what's going to happen. You're going to have the Chiefs coming at them, and maybe on Monday we'll be talking about this Chiefs defense doing another job on another team in the playoffs as opposed to Mahomes' magic, because Mahomes now, we spoke last year and we spoke at the Super Bowl coming out of Las Vegas that it doesn't necessarily have to be it was in the end last year with Mahomes in overtime, but 9 times out of 10 in the playoffs it hasn't been Mahomes that's done the job. It's the defense, and that for me kind of is where we're at. I think come the weekend, CJ Stroud might put it up to them, but ultimately I think he might come up short.
Well, where we're at is the best football weekend of the year. We've got the divisional round coming up, quarterfinals of the Super Bowl. No chaff, only the wheat left at this stage. The games and the NFL released the schedule this morning if you haven't seen them yet. So at Saturday night, 9:30 Irish times, the Texans, whom we've just been talking about, will travel to Kansas City to play the Chiefs. That's the ESPN game. 1 a.m. in the morning on Sunday morning, the Commanders take on the Lions at Ford Field. That's on Fox. And the NFC then, the other side of the draw, we'll see who comes out of the Vikings-Rams game tonight. They will visit Lincoln Financial Fields to face the Philadelphia Eagles. That's an NBC game. And the 11:30 game is the AFC divisional game where the Ravens, as we were talking about a little bit earlier, go to Highmark Stadium in Orchard Park, New York, to take on the Buffalo Bills. That's the CBS game. Lots for our viewing pleasure. We'll break it all down on Thursday when we do our previews and picks for the divisional round weekend. And that's our wildcard recap. Thanks very much for listening and for tuning in, and for all of those listening back to us on the podcast. Like and subscribe to the Irish NFL Show. It helps grow the community and brings other people into the fold. We'll talk to you very soon.